Hi everyone, my name is Lily Rose and I'm with my colleague and my friend Lanaire, and we have produced a workshop which we presented at the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium 2020, and we've decided to record the workshop so we could distribute it more widely. So to give a bit of a brief about the workshop, but to start as well, when we conducted the workshop at the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium, we asked our participants to bring a food item, an object they associated with safety, a paper and a pen, or a piece of paper and a pen. So if you don't have these objects, please pause the video and go and get them if you can. And if you can't, then write down a food item and an object you associate with safety, so that you have them when needed. But to give you a sense of the workshop, so we were asked for this to explore safe spaces for being human in higher education. So with that, we wanted to play with comfort, with safety, and we wanted to explore safety critically in higher education. We also wanted to approach this maybe less like a workshop and more like a shared meal, hence hence our title, Setting the Table, Sitting with Selves. But just a few things to mention from the get-go. Because the exploration in this workshop is around safe spaces. Of course, anything that is said is confidential. Now, of course, you'll all be in different settings right now, because you'll either be in small groups or large groups, or you'll be alone. So if you are in a group, it is worth setting that kind of parameter from the get-go of confidentiality. And also because the theme of our workshop is around how we set the table, sit with selves in a shared meal, we really would call on you all to listen to your body. So don't hesitate to get up and go get a coffee or go to the bathroom, stretch your legs, like you would if you were having dinner with friends. Listen to your body, listen to your needs, and yeah, listen to how you're physically feeling in the space. So yeah, this is just a run through of the first part of this workshop. We'll just be kind of introducing ourselves and introducing ourselves to one another. So we wanted to do a little icebreaker. So this was the icebreaker that we had prepared just to familiarize ourselves with one another. So when we did this at the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium, because we had around 35-40 people on a Zoom call, it was quite hard to give everyone the opportunity to say this. So what we did was we had everyone type their response into the chat, and the purpose for this was so that we're bringing ourselves into this space, bringing our whole selves, and people had the opportunity to not only bring themselves into the space, but had the opportunity to feel seen. So by not only saying your own name, but seeing other people, saying other people's names within the space, there's some kind of a collective ethos or a sense of one another that gets created. So if you're in a smaller group, you could do this activity by saying your names out loud. If you're in a larger group, you might want to do it over comments or in a chat like we did. Also, this is at the point where you bring your food item into the space. So the way we did it was we each wrote down our names, what our intentions were for the space, our food item, and then named 3 people we could see on the screen. And then we showed our food item to the camera. So that was bringing the food together. So we'd like to call on you all now to pause the workshop and carry out this activity for maybe 5-10 minutes, depending on the size of your group. Linarie?
So it was really important for us to involve a lot of reflective exercises within the workshop. And we had a few prompts, which you can see, such as, how did you find this activity? How do you feel heading into this workshop? How do you feel after our introductions? And why have we done this? And we feel this is important because we think it's important to check in with people that are participating in a workshop. And because this was a workshop on contemplative pedagogy, having that element of contemplation was very key. And so whilst as a facilitator or as a teacher, you might want to bring some exercises that allow for reflection, we also want to remind you that you can be very creative and flexible with the kind of reflective exercise that you bring, as long as you connect it with the themes that you have, and you ask questions such as, let's start with like hows, that would mean that students are more likely to, well, students and staff or anybody within the workshop will be more likely to respond in depth. And so a lot of responses were actually very in depth. And I also want to remind people that it's okay if the space is silent. And I think it's important to honor that silence. And so participants might respond with, silence. And so don't feel uncomfortable with that. And if you do feel uncomfortable, it's okay to also speak about the discomfort. So my name is Lanaire, and I'm a poet, playwright, and performer, and I'm also a Warwick student. I just finished my degree in sociology and starting my master's in writing at Warwick. And I'm really, really interested in a lot of playful pedagogies, decolonial pedagogies, as well as Black feminist pedagogies. And I use this to inform both my practice as an artist, but also my scholarship. And I just really, really enjoy using a lot of the methods I use in performing in the classroom as well, because I believe that the classroom is another liberatory space, or should be another liberatory space. And next, we want to show you a table manners video, which is a video by an artist called Zina Sarawiwa.
Can you still see this on the screen, Lanaire?
No, I can't.
Okay, let me see.
And so while Lily Rose is doing that, I think it's very important that you basically start by introducing yourself. Lily Rose and I felt like it would not only break the ice, but speaking also about our interest as well would mean that we're not presented as just like people with academic interest, but we're actually made to be human. And so if you notice, when I was introducing myself, I spoke about how I love poetry and I love performing. And this might not seem, extremely obvious to anyone to do, but it's just a good way to break the ice and make yourself, human, which is what you are. But I'll just start by letting you watch the table manners video.
Yeah, also just to reiterate, yeah, Lanaire, yeah, completely agree with all of what you said. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so in the spirit of contemplative pedagogy, we asked the people that were involved in the workshop to share what they thought about table manners. And it was very interesting because a lot of people were silent, and that's why I mentioned earlier that it's okay to honor that silence. And yeah, for me, it was the reason why this video was important was because it really went well with the metaphors we were using, as Lily Rose mentioned earlier, tables and sitting with yourselves and yeah, and this idea of eating and what we do when we eat, and this idea of also just enjoying the process, because that's what the spectators, sorry, not spectators, that's what the participants in the film were doing.
Hi, I'm Lily Rose, and I also am just going to introduce myself in line with what Lanaire was saying. So I'm Irish. I'm a recent liberal arts graduate from the University of Warwick, and there are so many reasons why I was interested in the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium. A lot of my interests are in how we create safe spaces in higher education. A lot of my interests come from kind of psychoanalytic object relations, attachment thought, but I've also worked outside of the kind of academic space with a lot of non-governmental organizations, trying to create safe spaces for children internationally. So a part of different charities, different projects. I'm really interested in what teaching and learning looks like when we utilize contemplative and critical practices. And I'm also really interested in our relationships with our cyber selves and what that will look like in terms of teaching in the coming year. But in terms of this workshop, I think there are two things that I really wanted to mention in terms of the dialogue I was having with myself on being asked to co-create this workshop and co-coordinate it. Firstly, there was some, considering the topic that we're discussing is around how we create safe spaces, and so hence why we wanted to create this kind of feeling of a shared meal. I realized how in many ways I was so afraid that I wouldn't be able to hold the space or make it a safe space, and by virtue of that I wasn't really facilitating myself to feel safe within the space. And I was coming up against this kind of rock and a hard place, this dialogue within myself of how do I create a space where I feel safe and also facilitate others to feel safe in this space, and where are the boundaries of that. So to kind of reiterate what Lanaire was saying, which I think is really valuable, when we talk about how we navigate silence. So silence can feel uncomfortable, but also often discomfort can be really, really fruitful, and we can create really interesting conversation and dialogue from moments of discomfort. But how do we balance that without making people feel unsafe in this space? And you know, for myself in terms of this space, in order to feel safe, sometimes I feel like I immediately need to jump into silences, like Lanaire was saying. But that may not necessarily actually be the most effective or facilitative practice for holding this space. So there was a lot in terms of that kind of contemplative self-reflection that needed to take place before even conducting this workshop, in terms of how can I meet both, and also not assume that I have to be kind of subhuman to hold the space as well. So not assuming anything more than myself than what I am. So allowing all my nerves and all of those anxieties to come into the space in order to be whole here, for it to be safe. And then the other side of it was one of the reasons why Lanaire and I were excited about taking part in the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium is because every other year until now, students haven't been a part of the symposium. So to have had the opportunity to run a workshop as students was really, really valuable. But one of the thoughts I then had was, if we're going to have conversations around how we create safe spaces in higher education, we need more student voices involved in that conversation, because higher education is something that is interdependent with students and staff. So to have a space which is pretty much all staff bar myself and Lanaire, I was concerned that as a student I wanted to make sure I was bringing in other student voices and recognizing that Lanaire and I can't represent or homogenize the student body. So for that reason I decided to reach out to students to get a sense of what how they felt about how we create safe spaces in higher education, and then in particular online in the coming year. And I have a video to share with you to illustrate some of those viewpoints.
Yes, I can hear.
Yeah.
What makes you comfortable in the space? What makes me comfortable in the space is when I can see people's facial expressions. So if we're sat in a circle and it's balanced.
The one thing that makes me feel comfortable in a space is when I'm valued and treated like an equal to everyone else in the existing space.
I think when the space is welcoming, and then when I first enter the space, I get to know what this space is about, and I know the purpose of the space.
I feel comfortable when speaking in a safe space when I know that it's okay to make a mistake and people are there to support me.
I'm comfortable in a space when there's been a recognition of potential power differences within the space. And by virtue of that, there's been at least somewhat an attempt to disable those power differences.
So what makes me comfortable in a group is knowing whatever I say, whatever I share is going to be greeted by people's genuine feelings and genuine responses. Because what makes me uncomfortable is in a group is feeling as if the response I receive is false, and they may, behind my back, then discuss their genuine beliefs, genuine thoughts, what I share with them, and possibly even ridicule what I said behind my back.
What one thing in particular makes you uncomfortable in a space would be, say, in a lecture hall when there's one authoritarian figure and then the rest of the students are sat in the back. You can't see people's faces, or when people make comments or suggestions, you can't see them because they're behind you. I find that really intimidating.
I feel uncomfortable in a space when there's a lot of judgment and negativity, and I feel that I can't express myself.
I'm most uncomfortable in a space when I feel like there have been assumptions made about me or about what I have to offer.
I tend to feel very uncomfortable in a space when the space feels impersonal, when I don't know who is around me, who I'm talking to, and also when my opinions are overshadowed.
When I'm given too much attention in a space will make me feel uncomfortable.
What one key thing is needed for a safe space? Kindness.
Compassion.
The person in the space feels that he or she is in control of what he or she is doing.
A lot of personalization needs to be done. You need to know who is sitting in the room with you and how they're reacting to specific content.
I feel like the one thing that every space needs to feel safe is trust. That's a bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. So in order to gain trust first, if you don't know the people, it's openers, icebreakers I see as so essential.
How do you feel when you're having potentially difficult conversations online? When I have particularly difficult conversations online, I'm always worried that my words will be misinterpreted, and I'm worried that a lot of people will think badly because I haven't been able to express myself fully with my body language, my intonation, and I can't be converted over the internet.
I feel a lot less intimidated online because you are in your own room, you feel safer in your own room, and you can switch your camera off if you want to, or you know that, if you want to say something you can, but you don't see so many faces looking at you, or you don't feel like you're stuck in this room with loads of people. So I think it's better.
When thinking about having significant conversation in online spaces, I feel a bit daunted simply due to the fact that we're relying solely on communication without any reference to body language or anything else. And I think when there are existing hierarchies in an online space, it's a lot more difficult to navigate.
When it comes to online safe spaces, this may just be me, but I think I may actually be a little bit more comfortable online sharing sensitive details about myself and so on, because for certain topics, depending on the nature of them, it's a bit better to be less interpersonal, I think. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's how I feel about it.
I may feel very stressed out at first, but because I also like taking challenges. So when my stress out period passes, I'm actually get really excited about having this kind of conversations. Yeah, but my initial reactions is gonna be, panic. Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, in terms of the video, a few things I just wanted to mention, or one kind of primary point is, even in that sample that we had of students, that's still such a small sample compared to the size of the student body. And to have such a variety of feelings towards how we create safe spaces online, what that would look like, what that needs, and what makes someone feel unsafe in a either online or in higher education physically. It tells us so much about the significance of having student voices present, but recognizing that no one student or two students can represent such a diverse body, and the significance of cultivating spaces where students and staff are coming together to talk about how we cultivate safe spaces in higher education together. So that was the first part of our workshop. It was really just giving us an opportunity to introduce ourselves to one another. Lanaire and I wanted to give ourselves an opportunity to introduce ourselves to you all, and to also recognize those voices that aren't present. So obviously you'll all be in your own circumstances. So some of you may be in classrooms with all students and one staff member. You may be on your own. But for just by virtue of the workshop we did, because it was all staff with us, we wanted the chance to make sure that those students that weren't being represented were brought into the space by having that student voice video present. But for the second part of this workshop, we started looking at what makes a space safe. When is a safe space? When is a safe space safe? And so we started this off with a word associations activity. So we did it on Padlet because, again, there was so many of us, and we were all online. So if you don't know what Padlet is, it's a great platform where basically you can add kind of sticky notes. So everyone would have the chance to write down words or feelings or concrete images that they associated with, firstly with safe spaces, and secondly with online spaces. However, if you're on your own, or if you're with a group, you can also do this on a whiteboard, for example, with pen and paper, or you could create your own Padlet links to carry out this activity as well. So there's a lot of option with how you want to do this activity. So we'd want to give you now, give yourselves 15 minutes to do this. So pause the workshop video and carry this activity out, and then we'll come back and have some reflection on how we feel about the words that we've come up with. Okay, welcome back. So a few questions and prompts for this activity in terms of reflecting would be, for example, how do the words that we've come up with in terms of online spaces and safe spaces differ? And why do we think that is? So what do we associate with online space? What do we associate with safe space? How do they differ? What similarities, or were there any similarities between the words that we came up with? Why did we choose these words? How do we feel looking at these two sets of words? And how does this make us feel about the space we're in right now? So when we conducted this workshop, we wanted also to make sure we were reflecting on the space that we were existing in presently with our participants. How are we feeling? Does this feel like a safe space? Because we are online. We are talking about higher education. How could we make this space that we're currently in feel safer? And that was kind of one of the aims of this activity, to get a sense of what are the differences, what are the similarities, and how can we make an online space feel safe? So yeah, give yourselves a chance, if you want, again, to pause the video and to think about some of those prompts for this activity, and reflect together.
So we decided to introduce a task that was going to be based off this idea of haikus. And again, in the spirit of contemplative pedagogies, we wanted to offer an exercise that was going to allow for introspection and just being able to sit with your thoughts and reflect on the thoughts as well. And so a haiku is basically a Japanese poem that is made up of 3 lines, and it follows a syllabic structure of 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, and 5 syllables in the third line. And Lily Rose and I basically created our own haikus, and we did this so that it could be like a call and response. So we found that in the past, people tend to respond better when you've done something and then you've given them examples and then you ask them to respond to that. And so our haikus both have that syllabic structure. And can you go to the next slide, please?
Oh, yeah.
And so what we did was we asked the people at the workshop to basically get some time in their breakout rooms and write their haikus, and we encourage them to share those haikus in the chat box of Zoom. And so I think, again, in the spirit of collaborative responses, what that meant was that people saw each other's haikus, and some of them were even commenting on the others, like, oh wow, you commented on nature, or you spoke on dogs, or you spoke on teddy bears. And just being able to see the varied responses was really, really exciting for both of us as facilitators. But it also meant that the attendees had something to go back to, and they can take something away even beyond the workshop. And sometimes for people, that is very important, that they leave a workshop knowing that they've done something creative.
It's also worth mentioning as well that for this activity, because we asked you all to bring an object that you associated with safety, one of the ways that we purposed the activity was that you wrote your object, you wrote your haiku about the object of safety, and so there was a few reasons that we wanted to do this. So, for example, in terms of writing about an object you associate with safety, how did you feel writing those haikus? Did the fact you were asked to write about an object that you associate with safety impact how you felt writing the haiku? So, for example, for some people, writing a haiku may have, especially in the circumstances we were under, may have felt really normal. For some others, it may have been quite an intimidating task. It may have not felt like a really safe task. So, how does writing about something you associate with safety impact that? Do you think you would have felt differently if you could have written about anything? Did it make the activity feel safer using a safe object, or maybe did it make the object feel less safe? How did you feel about the boundaries or structures put in place for this activity in regards to writing haikus? Who liked it and disliked it? So, for example, as Lanaire said, there's a 5-7-5 structure which you follow in writing a haiku. How does that feel when writing the haiku, having these kind of boundaries put in place? What does structure do to us when we're uncomfortable? Does it make us feel restricted? Does it make us feel tense? Or does it make us feel trapped? Or does giving structure give us a sense of, or boundaries give us a sense of safety in itself, a sense of being held, contained? And how can we bring safe associations into potentially uncomfortable spaces? So that haiku, as I said, may have been uncomfortable to write for some, but how do we draw on our experiences of safety, our individuality, to be able to reshape or restructure a space to make it feel safe? So there's some of the thoughts that we were reflecting on. For example, my haiku, he ran to thunder, power armed with me in arms to save, soft and safe, is about my teddy from my childhood. I once left him in an airport, and before we were about to get on the plane, my family realized, and my father ran through the airport to get him back for me before getting on the plane. So that was the object of safety that I wrote about, but I had the kind of seasonal references in terms of thunder. Lanaire, would you like to read yours as well before we move on? Also, we want to make sure that so to give yourselves about 20 minutes to write your own haikus and then share them with one another if you want, if you'd be comfortable to, and then we call on you to think about the prompts that we've given and ask one another how you felt writing that, how you felt writing about the safe object, and how you felt about the structure when it comes to creating safe spaces. But Lanaire, would you like to read your haiku before we move on?
Yeah, so mine is, when you plant a seed, you hope it grows, so sadness leaves, joy stays. And I just really want to point something out. So my second line in my haiku is actually not 7 syllables, and I did that deliberately because we wanted participants to appreciate the importance of noticing, and noticing is a key element of contemplative pedagogy. So it was something that really allowed me when I did speak about that to, first of all, interact really well with the participants, but also it meant that there was a sort of surprise or challenge, because I asked participants, well, what do you notice in my poem? Is anything odd about it? And so, Lily Rose mentioned this idea of using objects and how we encourage participants to respond to these objects. And in the same vein, I did that by also offering a different kind of challenge. And so I think it's very important that as facilitators that you think of how best to engage with your participants and how to kind of like throw, throw random things in the workshops that are connected to the theme, but are also very surprising and challenging in a very good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely. And it's really interesting when you as you say, in terms of like that noticing and how that links to contemplative pedagogy. It's also worth us mentioning as well, because we were the second workshop of the day. The first workshop talked more about how we are kind of defining or conceptualizing contemplative pedagogy in and of itself, hence why we haven't kind of addressed that so head on. But Lanaire's pointed out one of those really important characteristics in terms of slowing down, in terms of noticing. And I think the haiku is a wonderful tool for contemplative pedagogy, because it's about how we slow down, how we notice, and how we then take what we're seeing and we're experiencing and those kind of seasonal experiences, and we bring them into that kind of short form. But also in terms of our safe objects, I think there's something really interesting in terms of how you could have an object that you associate with safety your whole life, but how often do you really look at it or give it that feeling? So I'd also call on you, while you're writing your haiku, to take your object in your hand if you have it with you, and to feel its surface, run it through your fingers, really look at it and give it that kind of slow, mindful attention that is so characteristic of contemplative practices. But yeah, so give yourselves 20 minutes to take that time. You can give yourself more. There's obviously no pressure here. And then come back to us when you've done that and when you've had time to reflect for the next part of this workshop, where we talk about brave spaces.
So there's also a plot twist. So we've spoken a lot about contemplative pedagogies, and we've given you a lot of exercises that are, really well connected with that theme. But I want to share a story with you, and this story is really inspired by a real life event. So it was International Women's Day, and I was really excited but very exhausted. Every day of every year, I heard the same old speech. But this year was different. Janine Francois, a scholar, curator, and producer, introduced us to this concept of brave spaces. And this is the plot twist. So Janine basically explores this idea of how universities are contested spaces due to their histories, and these histories are histories that have legacies that have reproduced a lot of white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal epistemologies. In short, the kind of knowledge that we produce is something that we have to be mindful of as a university. But as actors within this very, very contested space, we also have to be very aware of the violence that we might be reproducing as well, whether it's how we set up a classroom, or the kind of knowledges that we encourage as assessment methods, or even the kind of readings that are ranked higher in the reading list. Or ranked higher means that maybe you have recommended reading is often maybe by Black scholars, and then the reading that is compulsory is not by Black scholars. And so whilst I'm not encouraging a diversity tick box, I'm saying that we all need to kind of rethink why we don't welcome braver spaces, whether it's in the classroom or with a workshop. And so reading Janine Francois' abstract just reminded me of this question that I've always had in my head. And it's this question: who is safety for? And what are they seeking safety from? And who are we playing safe for? So, whilst radical listening and critical reflection are very important, action is also very, very key. And I think her question, who is safety for and what are they seeking safety for? I believe that it's important that we contemplate on these questions, and it would allow us to set the table and sit with ourselves. So I had a few recommendations on how we can create braver spaces. An example is encouraging Black and Brown students to share their lived experiences. And that's what I've put as experiential learning. So learning through reflection on doing. The second example is encouraging Black and Brown students to flip the script. And so when I say flip the script, I've basically reconceptualized this idea of ordering, arranging, and membering. And I've put them in bracket deliberately to show how it's important that we reorder, rearrange, and remember. And that means that we basically ensure that in creating spaces that we're constantly thinking of whether these spaces are safe for some and unsafe for others. And an example of this is the exclusion of reading list by Black thinkers. So that is an example of how maybe some academics, tutors, facilitators might play it safe. They might be very uncomfortable exploring certain texts because they're seen as too radical, or they might think that they don't have the capacity to explore these texts. But that also assumes that students are producers of knowledge, because students might be able to contribute a lot more than a tutor might to that text. So really, really thinking of these power hierarchies and dynamics is very, very important. But more importantly, I think it's really asking ourselves, who are we playing it safe for? So, for instance, I noticed that in a lot of modules, you'd have the texts that are often left for the last week of term are texts by Black thinkers. And what that means is that by the time it's like week 10, a lot of students are fatigued and they're extremely exhausted. And so the rate at which students come for lectures is a lot less, which means that it is very, very possible that for 3 years of your university life, you don't ever read anything by a Black woman, for instance. And so I think it's very, very important that we rethink these technologies of safety, and we think of how, as educators, we might be rendering a space unsafe by our actions. And so whilst radical listening and critical reflection are very important, as I've mentioned, I think this really sums up my provocations to you all, and it's inspired by Janine's question: how can we create braver spaces? And I would really like you all to take time to really think about that. So yes, take as much time as you can in answering this question. And it's a question that you can always come back to. Lily Rose. Yeah, so this question also is a follow-up from the other one. So when is a space brave? And you can think about this now or at your own time.
Thank you all for participating with us, and thank Lanaire. Thank you so much. Everything you said is so critical, and I think it's a perfect way to critically reflect on what we've been talking about in terms of safe spaces and how we create safe spaces in higher education, and how safety can be used as a tool to also silence and to create for other agendas. So while we talk about the significance of creating safe spaces, we also have to consider how safety can be used for policing and silencing. But yeah, so to wrap up the workshop, we wanted to just open up the space to our participants for any final thoughts, reflections, and for that kind of end of meal digesting. And what we asked our participants to do is share a food metaphor. So there's a few ways you could do that. That could be done on the Padlet, or we asked you all to have a paper and a pen ready. So what we had our participants do was write down a word on a piece of paper and show it to the screen, or show it to their webcam, so we could look at all the words on the screen at the same time, which was really, really lovely. Actually, it was a really nice, kind of funny way to end the workshop. So words could be full, nourished, malnourished, digested, digesting, starved, undigested, sweet, sour. So any word that you feel kind of encapsulates that kind of end of meal process of taking in what we've been discussing, which has been in many ways really rich, and has created really rich discussion within the group that we had the opportunity to be a part of. And we really hope that in wherever you are, whether you're alone or with a small group or online with a large group, that you've had the opportunity to have similarly really rich conversations and are feeling as nourished and that process of digesting that we were in when we conducted this. But that's everything. Thank you so much for participating with us. Lanaire, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we end the workshop?
Yeah, I think Naomi, who's she's basically an IATL tutor, but she's also an amazing educator, and she runs 2 modules, Change and Reinventing Education, at work. She's always really reminded all of us to think about the metaphors we use, and I think that is, a key takeaway, because in planning this, we had to really be conscious of the kind of metaphors we were using, because language is very powerful. And I think one thing I also want to encourage is to not be afraid of using certain technologies. Lily Rose mentioned earlier about how she's really interested in, cyberspaces and online spaces. And I think as we move into a kind of new normal, or whatever normal is to you, we have to really be conscious. Well, not conscious, but we have to not be afraid to experiment and have fun and play. And I think the use of things like Padlet and breakout rooms was a real testament to that. What do you think, Lily Rose?
No, absolutely. I think it was also really testing the boundaries of what co-creation looks like. I think everything you're saying is spot on. We were really nervous going into this workshop in terms of how we were going to create that co-creative environment. We didn't want it to just be, I mean, obviously, because right now we haven't got any participants, this probably feels more like a workshop that is kind of prescriptive than we'd want. But at the time, obviously, we had those kind of interactions, that dialogue, and that was really, really significant to us, that we were engaging with the reflections that the participants were bringing into the space. And like Lanaire was saying earlier, respecting our participants like we should respect students as producers of knowledge and experts in their own right, and experiential experts, and everything that they can bring in, and how that shaped the direction of the workshop. So what's also really exciting about this is when you kind of create that co-creative practice, everyone's experience, whoever's watching this, your different experiences will be different because of what you all bring into the space and bring to the conversation, which was what we kind of found the most exciting about conducting this. But as Lanaire was saying, not being afraid, even as we move online in this kind of blended approach in the coming year, to really seek out those kind of platforms where you can be more co-creative, that it's not just relying on a kind of a lecture style of teaching. So things like Padlet, even having those kind of being able to comment in the chat and having that kind of flux of dialogue, giving time and space for reflection, for conversation, as Lanaire said, for breakout rooms, so that you're not speaking for the entirety of the session. And there's so many other kind of platforms and technologies being created to facilitate this, whether it's on Microsoft Teams or in other platforms online. So seek those out. I think that makes a huge difference. But yeah. Lanaire, thank you so much. Just I always learn so much from you, and I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to work with you on this. And thank you to Naomi, Caroline, and Siobhan as well, who ran the workshop with us, the Contemplative Pedagogy Symposium. But Lanaire, are we ready to close off?
Yeah, thank you so much as well, Lily Rose. I learned a lot, and I think this idea of being receptive to experiment and to play is something that I've learned from you. And I agree that with this online learning, that there's so much that we can do to be innovative. But
thanks so much. Are you able to stop the recording on your side?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.